I do just want to share two little facts about the movie. One is the movie says that 70% of 8th graders are reading below grade level. And that is really the core of the movie. Without that statement of this horrible performance, the whole movie collapses. But it's not true. The only source of data for a statement like that is the National Assessment of Educational Progress. And as Dan mentioned, he and I both served on that board of NAEP. And the actual figure is not 70%, it's 25%. 25% of students in 8th grade are below basic, and that includes students who don't speak or read English, as well as students who have various kinds of disabilities. 25% is very different from 70%. One of the charter schools that he features in the film is a boarding school, and while he says that resources don't matter, this particular boarding school costs the public $35,000 per year per student, $35,000 a year, while in the state of Arizona they're spending less than $6,000 a year per student. But he says resources don't matter. In this school, which when I wrote the review, I went to the website and they said 96% of our graduates go to college. And I thought, wow, this is really impressive. But then someone sent me a page from the U.S. Department of Education website about that school. And I discovered that of the 140 students who start in 7th grade, only 34 graduated last June. That's a 75% attrition rate. But 96% of them went to college. Actually, they're doing better than they used to. A few years ago, only 13 of the 140 graduated, and 96% of them probably went to college too. A few months ago, a group of urban superintendents, this was, I think it was in September, issued what they called a manifesto in the Washington Post, in which they said they knew how to fix schools. They said that bad teachers were the cause of our education problems, echoing the corporate reform agenda. The leaders of this group became famous amongst themselves for firing teachers. They became famous for firing teachers, closing schools, and insisting that slash and burn tactics were the very best ways to reform our nation's terrible school system. Now, how did this get tough approach become the national formula for educational leadership? Who decided that the best way to lead a school district is to heap scorn on the teachers, fire them if their student scores don't go up, close the schools, hand control over to private entrepreneurs, and then call a press conference to boast about it? The media idolizes administrators who appear contemptuous of teachers, but this divisive approach is not good leadership. You're leaders. You're leaders, and you know that good leadership is about inspiring your staff, showing them that you believe in them, bringing out the best in them, helping them overcome the obstacles they face, encouraging them to pull together as a team to do what's right for students. A good general does not fire on his own troops. Unfortunately, the punitive approach is now winning the day, in large part because the media thinks it's so cool to be mean and hard-hearted and tough. And today, public education is the target of an unprecedented firestorm of criticism. The goals of the corporate reform movement are privatization and deprofessionalization. The corporate reformers run down public education. They insist it's in crisis, it's never been in a worse crisis, and our nation faces economic decline unless we act quickly and decisively, preferably without too much deliberation or debate. The time for deliberation is past, if ever it came. All this crisis talk is a prelude to turning control of public dollars over to privately managed schools. The corporate reformers dismiss the importance of credentials, of professionalism, of training, and experience. They say experience doesn't matter. All of this is a prelude to saying that anyone can be a teacher, a principal, or a superintendent. It's like taking us not into the future, but back to the early 19th century, before there was a teaching profession. They say that public education is broken and it can't be improved. If you speak of school improvement, they laugh and say, you can't improve a school, you can only close it. Some of the corporate reformers have suggested that our nation needs a Hurricane Katrina to wash away the whole public school system and start from scratch. I've noticed that many of the people who say this are themselves products of Exeter, Andover, Deerfield Academy, Sidwell Friends, and other elite boarding schools and private schools where their parents paid high tuition. They have little sympathy or love for public education. They just want to own it. It's now conventional wisdom to say that public education is a failure and that this great institution that built our nation is beyond repair, that schools don't need to be subject to democratic control because democracy is the problem, and I've heard this said very openly. If you go back to the Chubb and Moe book on choice, published in the early 1990s, they say it, democracy is the problem, and that is why choice is a panacea to get rid of democracy. Mayoral control also effectively solves that problem. They say that our student scores on international tests will doom us to decline, that our schools are obsolete, that teachers are the cause of low scores, and that the best way to reform schools is to fire the staff, close the schools, and turn them over to private organizations funded by entrepreneurs, by Wall Street hedge fund managers. The national media has turned into a giant echo chamber, lamenting the quality of public schools, lambasting those who work in them. Never mind that the pundits and the talking heads wouldn't last a day in a public school. And you can be sure that not a one of them would trade their salaries for that of a public school teacher or administrator, not for one day. We read the same disparaging narrative in Time, Newsweek, the major newspapers. We hear it from pundits like Thomas Friedman, Nicholas Kristof, David Brooks. It's replayed and broadcast by the Gates Foundation, the Broad Foundation, the Walton Foundation, the D.C. think tank, Secretary Duncan, President Obama. We heard it in Waiting for Superman. The narrative is wrong. It's factually wrong. This false narrative will harm our children, undermine public education, and damage our nation. We have to stand up and say so again and again and again out loud. Public education is one of the cornerstones of our democracy. If we weaken it, we weaken our democracy. We must improve it, not privatize it. Every neighborhood should have a good public school. Public schools build community. They're part of our democratic heritage as Americans. Let me try to set the record straight. Start with the international assessments. When the results of PISA were released last December in 2010, I have a hard time with these numbers, 2010, the media expressed shock and alarm because American students placed somewhere in the middle on these assessments. And we heard dire predictions that we were losing the global test score race to Shanghai and Finland. Actually, I don't think anyone was too upset that we were losing to Finland because Finland's not exactly aspiring to be a world power, and they're happy about that. But there was a lot of shock expressed about losing the global race to Shanghai and Finland. By the way, no one mentioned that the #1 scoring nation in the world, Finland, the children in that country never take standardized tests at all until they apply to college. There are no standardized tests in the #1 scoring nation in the world. In his State of the Union address, the President said, referring to PISA, "This is our generation's Sputnik moment." He and Secretary Duncan warned that the nation is in danger of losing the future if we couldn't get those scores up. What the President didn't know, and probably the Secretary doesn't know either, what their own Department of Education didn't tell them, is that the test scores of American students on international assessments were far worse in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. The Soviet Union launched its Sputnik satellite in 1957. We did not respond by raising our test scores on international assessments. For the past 50 years, our students were usually dead last or in the bottom quarter on the international test of math and science. And yet here we are, the strongest, most powerful nation in the world, and there is no more Soviet Union. It's gone. The President said in his State of the Union address, quote, America still has the largest, most prosperous economy in the world. No workers are more productive than ours. No country has more successful companies. No country has more grants, more patents to inventors and entrepreneurs. We're home to the world's best colleges and universities where more students come to study than any other place on earth. Now, Professor Yang Zhao, who's a Chinese-born and Chinese-educated scholar now at the University of Oregon, reacted to the president's speech by asking these questions. Who educated those productive workers? Who educated the founders of those successful companies? Who educated those inventors and entrepreneurs? Who provided the brainpower for the world's best colleges and universities? It must have been that terrible cohort of students who were in the bottom quartile of the international assessments in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. So Professor Yang Zhao said, as I often say, it doesn't make sense. Something must be wrong with the logic, or something's wrong with those international assessments if our allegedly terrible public schools continue to produce the greatest workers, thinkers, leaders, and innovators that created the greatest economy in the world. The president said that we need to out-educate the rest of the world and to stimulate innovation, imagination, and creativity, and he is certainly right about that. He said that the winners of the science fair should be applauded just as much as the winner of the Super Bowl. He's right about that, and when that day comes, we will all say, thank God. But only a few days later, after his speech, the New York Times reported that participation in science fairs has been declining because of the federal government's emphasis on standardized testing in reading and math. And so while the president wants to encourage science and science fairs, federal policies incentivize the very opposite. Just last fall, Newsweek had a cover story about declining creativity among young Americans. Is it any wonder if we make standardized testing the sole criterion of success in schooling, we reward the ability to pick the right answer and not creativity, imagination, or innovation? The student who thinks differently is punished, not recognized, and not celebrated. The student who has a new idea, a different way of thinking, will be marked down. Let's consider Race to the Top, which the president said was, quote, the work of teachers and principals, local school boards, and communities. Anybody here have anything to do with writing Race to the Top? Raise your hand. I don't see any hands out there, but he did say local school boards and teachers and principals. But it wasn't local teachers and principals and school board members. I've talked to people who were involved in the writing of Race to the Top. It was not local teachers and principals and school board members who decided that states should increase the number of privately managed charter schools. That was the big foundations who made that decision. It was not teachers and administrators who demanded merit pay, but business leaders. It was not educators who demanded that teachers should be evaluated by student test scores, but economists who think that test scores are the best and possibly the only measure of school performance. Nor was it teachers or principals or local school board members who proposed to turn around struggling schools by closing them. Nor is it locals who want to change the basic principle of federal aid by awarding it to states based on a competition rather than sending the money to the schools and the districts that serve the neediest students. No, Race to the Top was not designed by teachers or principals or school boards or communities. It does not reflect what districts want. It does not reflect the best thinking of those who work in schools. They were not consulted. It was designed early in 2009 by high-level officials in the U.S. Department of Education, working along with advisors from the Gates Foundation and the Broad Foundation. Secretary Duncan hired the chief operating officer of the New Schools Venture Fund to run that competition for $4.3 billion. The New Schools Venture Fund is a California-based organization heavily funded by the Gates Foundation, the Broad Foundation, and other foundations, and its purpose is to expand charter school chains. The loudest complaint about Race to the Top came last summer from a coalition of 6 civil rights groups, including the NAACP, the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, the National Urban League, the Rainbow Push Coalition, and the Schott Foundation for Public Education. The civil rights groups rejected the competitive nature of Race to the Top. They agreed with Secretary Duncan that access to high-quality education is a fundamental civil right. But they said, if that is the case, why should states compete for federal funds? After all, civil rights belong to individuals, not to states. With a competitive approach, only children in the winning states get any federal funds, while the children in the remaining states get no federal funds at all, no matter how needy they are. This approach, they said, represents a retreat from the basic principle of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. That principle is not a race, it's not competition, it's equality of educational opportunity. And the principle of equality of educational opportunity requires that federal funds go to the schools and the districts with the poorest children, not the schools and the districts who hire the best grant writers. When ESEA was passed in 1965, the rationale for federal aid to education was equity, not competition. The civil rights groups complained that if the Obama blueprint, the administration's plan for reauthorization of ESEA, if it enshrines the principle of competition, it will gut the promise of fairness and equity, the very rationale for federal aid to education in the first place, and most children, particularly poor children, will be the losers. And this is wrong. But there are even bigger problems with Race to the Top than its competitive nature. It promotes policies that have no basis in research or in practice. Superintendents in winning states have told me that it will cost them more to implement the mandates than the money that they will receive over 4 years. One superintendent in New York told me that his district will receive $60,000 over the next 4 years, and the district will have to spend over $300,000 to carry out the requirements. This is truly a pig in a poke. First, consider the strategies that districts and states are agreeing to do. First of all, they will get more privately managed charters, which will drain away public support and resources and students from the local public schools. The local public schools still have the same operating cost, still have the same brick and mortar cost, and most of the new privately managed charters will be no better than the local public schools, and some of them will be far worse than the local public schools. Second, the district will be required to evaluate its teachers by student test scores, which will be a contentious process that relies on unproven methods and produces dubious ratings. Third, districts will be expected to award some form of merit pay, which creates divisiveness among the staff. None of these initiatives is a proven reform, and some of them have weighty evidence against them. Charter schools, for example, do everything that the corporate reform movement wants. Almost all of them are non-union. Their teachers can be hired and fired at will. The charters can offer merit pay. They have freedom to innovate. Most of them innovate by becoming 19th century schools in which kids are tightly disciplined. They're the boot camp, no excuses school that look very much to my historian's eye like the American school of about 1835. And they don't get better results than regular public schools with all the freedom that they have. A major study in 2009 by economists at Stanford University, funded by the pro-choice Walton Foundation, evaluated half the nation's charters and found that only 17% got better results than a demographically similar neighborhood public school. 37% got worse results, and 46% got results that were no different. We knew that last year, but now there's more evidence about the performance of charter schools. Mathematica Policy Research studied charter middle schools with lotteries, compared them to regular public middle schools, and found that there was no difference either in terms of academics or behavior. On the NAEP, which has tested and compared charter students to regular public school students since 2003, there is now 03, 05, 07, and 09. There has never been an advantage for charter schools. Not for black students, not for Hispanic students, not for low-income students, and not for urban students. No difference. But nonetheless, it continues to be a powerful idea that's advancing with no evidence, and it seems as though the people promoting it simply don't care about evidence. They talk data all the time, and they don't care about data when it challenges